Samuel is here executing the office of a prophet, giving Saul full assurance from God that he should be king, as he was afterwards, according to these prophecies which went before of him. He anointed him and kissed him. This was not done in a solemn assembly, but it was done by divine appointment, which made up the want of all external solemnities, nor was it ever the less valid for its being done in private, under a hedge, or, as the Jews say, by a fountain. God's institutions are great and honorable, though the circumstances of their administration be ever so mean and despicable. Samuel, by anointing Saul, assured him that it was God's act to make him king. Is it not because the Lord hath anointed thee? And, in token of that, the high priest was anointed to his office, to signify the conferring of those gifts upon him that were requisite for the discharge of its duties, and the same was intimated in the anointing of kings, for whom God calls he qualifies, and suitable qualifications furnish good proof of a commission. These sacred unctions, then used, pointed at the great Messiah, or anointed one, the King of the Church, and high priest of our profession, who was anointed with the oil of the Spirit, not by measure, but without measure, and above all the priests and princes of the Jewish Church. It was common oil, no doubt, which Samuel used, and we read not of his blessing it or praying over it. But it was only a vial of oil that he anointed him with, the vessel brittle, because his kingdom would soon be cracked and broken, and the quantity small, because he had but little of the Spirit conferred upon him to what David had, who was therefore anointed with a horn of oil, as were Solomon and Jehu with a box of oil. By kissing him, he assured him of his own approbation of the choice, not only his consent to it, but his complacency in it, though it abridged his power and eclipsed his glory and the glory of his family. God has anointed thee, says Samuel, to be king, and I am satisfied and very well pleased, in pledge of which take this kiss. It was likewise a kiss of homage and allegiance. Hereby he not only owns him to be king, but his king, and in this sense we are commanded to kiss the Son. God has anointed him, and therefore we must thus acknowledge him and do homage to him. In Samuel's explication of the ceremony, he reminds him of the nature of the government to which he is called. He was anointed to be a captain, a commander indeed, which bespeaks honor and power, but a commander in war, which bespeaks care, and toil, and danger. Of the origin of it, the Lord hath anointed thee. By him he ruled, and therefore must rule for him, in dependence on him, and with an eye to his glory. Of the end of it, it is over his inheritance, to take care of that, protect it, and order all the affairs of it for the best, as a steward whom a great man sets over his estate, to manage it for his service and give an account of it to him. For his further satisfaction he gives him some signs, which should come to pass immediately, this very day, and they were such as would not only confirm the word of Samuel in general, and prove him a true prophet, but would confirm this word to Saul in particular, that he should be king. He should presently meet with some that would bring him intelligence from home of the care his father's house was in concerning him. These he would meet hard by Rachel's sepulchre. The first place Samuel directed him to was a sepulchre, the sepulchre of one of his ancestors, for Rachel died in travail with Benjamin. There he must read a lecture of his own mortality, and now that he had a crown in his eye must think of his grave, in which all his honor would be laid in the dust. Here 2 men would meet him, perhaps sent on purpose to look after him, and would tell him the asses were found, and his father was in pain concerning him, saying, "What shall I do for my son?" He would reckon it happened well that he met with these messengers, and it is good to eye providence in favorable conjunctures, though the matter be minute, and to be encouraged to trust it in greater matters. He should next meet with others going to Bethel, where, it should seem, there was a high place for religious worship, and these men were bringing their sacrifices thither. It was a token for good to one that was designed for the government of Israel, wherever he came, to meet with people going to worship God. It is supposed that those kids and loaves, and the bottle of wine which the 3 men had with them, were designed for sacrifice, with the meat offerings and drink offerings that were to attend the sacrifice. Yet Samuel tells Saul that they will give him 2 of their loaves, and he must take them. Such a present would look to us now like the relieving of a beggar. Saul must hereafter remember the time when he received alms, and must therefore be humble and charitable to the poor. But perhaps it would then be construed a fit present for a prince, and, as such, Saul must receive it, the first present that was brought to him, by such as knew not what they did, nor why they did it, but God put it into their hearts, which made it the more fit to be assigned to him. These 2 loaves, which were the first tribute paid to this newly anointed king, might serve for an admonition to him not to spend the wealth of his crown in luxury, but still to be content with plain food. Bread is the staff of life. 3. The most remarkable sign of all would be his joining with a company of prophets that he should meet with, under the influence of a spirit of prophecy, which should at that time come upon him. What God works in us by his Spirit serves much more for the confirming of faith than anything wrought for us by his providence. He here tells him where this would happen, at the hill of God, where there was a garrison of the Philistines, which is supposed to be near Gibeah, his own city, for there was the Philistines' garrison. Perhaps it was one of the articles of Samuel's agreement with them that they should have a garrison there, or, rather, after they were subdued in the beginning of his time they got ground again, so far as to force this garrison into that place, and thence God raised up the man that should chastise them. There was a place that was called the Hill of God, because of one of the schools of the prophets built upon it, and such respect did even Philistines themselves pay to religion that a garrison of their soldiers suffered a school of God's prophets to live peaceably by them, and did not only not dislodge them, but not restrain nor disturb the public exercises of their devotion. Upon what occasion, he should meet a company of prophets with music before them, prophesying, and with them he should join himself. These prophets were not, as it should seem, divinely inspired to foretell things to come, nor did God reveal himself to them by dreams and visions, but they employed themselves in the study of the law, in instructing their neighbors, and in the acts of piety, especially in praising God, wherein they were wonderfully assisted and enlarged by the Spirit of God. It was happy for Israel that they had not only prophets, but companies of prophets, who gave them good instructions and set them good examples, and helped very much to keep up religion among them. Now the word of the Lord was not precious, as it had been when Samuel was first raised up, who had been instrumental in founding these colleges, or religious houses, whence, it is probable, the synagogues took their rise. What a pity was it that Israel should be weary of the government of such a man, who though he had not, as a man of war, expelled the Philistines, yet, which was a greater kindness to Israel, had, as a man of God, settled the schools of the prophets. Music was then used as a proper means to dispose the mind to receive the impressions of the good Spirit, as it did Elisha's. But we have no reason to look for the same benefit by it now, unless we saw it as effectual as it was then in Saul's case, to drive away the evil spirit. These prophets had been at the high place, probably offering sacrifice, and now they came back singing psalms. We should come from holy ordinances with our hearts greatly enlarged in holy joy and praise. Saul should find himself strongly moved to join with them, and should be turned thereby into another man from what he had been while he lived in a private capacity. The Spirit of God, by his ordinances, changes men, wonderfully transforms them. Saul, by praising God in the communion of saints, became another man, but whether a new man or no may be questioned. He directs him to proceed in the administration of his government as providence should lead him, and as Samuel should advise him. He must follow providence in ordinary cases, do as occasion shall serve thee. Take such measures as thy own prudence shall direct thee. In an extraordinary strait that would hereafter befall him at Gilgal, and would be the most critical juncture of all, when he would have special need of divine aids, he must wait for Samuel to come to him, and must tarry 7 days in expectation of him. How his failing in this matter proved his fall we find afterwards. It was now a plain intimation to him that he was upon his good behavior, and, though a king, must act under the direction of Samuel, and do as he should order him. The greatest of men must own themselves in subjection to God and his word. The Ammonites were bad neighbors to those tribes of Israel that lay next them, though descendants from just Lot, and, for that reason, dealt civilly with by Israel. Jephthah, in his time, had humbled them, but now the sin of Israel had put them into a capacity to make head again, and avenge that quarrel. The city of Jabesh-Gilead had been, some ages ago, destroyed by Israel's sword of justice, for not appearing against the wickedness of Gibeah, and now being replenished again, probably by the posterity of those that then escaped the sword, it is in danger of being destroyed by the Ammonites, as if some bad fate attended the place. Nahash, king of Ammon, laid siege to it. Now hear. The besieged beat a parley, make a covenant with us, and we will surrender upon terms, and serve thee. They had lost the virtue of Israelites, else they would not have thus lost the valor of Israelites, nor tamely yielded to serve an Ammonite, without one bold struggle for themselves. Had they not broken their covenant with God, and forsaken his service, they needed not thus to have courted a covenant with a Gentile nation, and offered themselves to serve them. The besiegers offer them base and barbarous conditions, they will spare their lives, and take them to be their servants, upon condition that they shall put out their right eyes. The Gileadites were content to part with their liberty and estates for the ransom of their blood, and, had the Ammonites taken them at their word, the matter would have been so settled immediately, and the Gileadites would not have sent out for relief. But their abject concessions make the Ammonites more insolent in their demands, and they cannot be content to have them for their servants. They must torment them, and put them to pain, exquisite pain, for so the thrusting out of an eye would do. They must disable them for war, and render them incapable, though not of labor, that would have been a loss to their lords, yet of bearing arms, for in those times they fought with shields in their left hands, which covered their left eye, so that a soldier without his right eye was in effect blind. They must put a reproach upon all Israel, as weak and cowardly, that would suffer the inhabitants of one of their chief cities to be thus miserably used, and not offer to rescue them. The besieged desire, and obtain, 7 days' time to consider of this proposal. If Nahash had not granted them this respite, we may suppose the horror of the proposal would have made them desperate, and they would rather have died with their swords in their hands than have surrendered to such merciless enemies. Therefore Nahash, not imagining it possible that, in so short a time, they should have relief, and being very secure of the advantages he thought he had against them, in a bravado gave them 7 days, that the reproach upon Israel, for not rescuing them, might be the greater, and his triumphs the more illustrious. But there was a providence in it, that his security might be his infatuation and ruin. Notice is sent of this to Gibeah. They said they would send messengers to all the coasts of Israel, which made Nahash the more secure, for that, he thought, would be a work of time, and none would be forward to appear if they had not one common head, and perhaps Nahash had not yet heard of the new elected king. But the messengers, either of their own accord or by order from their masters, went straight to Gibeah, and, not finding Saul within, told their news to the people, who fell a-weeping upon hearing it. They would sooner lament their brethren's misery and danger than think of helping them, shed their tears for them than shed their blood. They wept, as despairing to help the men of Jabesh-Gilead, and fearing lest, if that frontier city should be lost, the enemy would penetrate into the very bowels of their country, which now appeared in great hazard. What is here related turns very much to the honor of Saul, and shows the happy fruits of that other spirit with which he was endued. Observe here his humility. Though he was anointed king, and accepted by his people, yet he did not think it below him to know the state of his own flocks, but went himself to see them, and came in the evening, with his servants, after the herd out of the field. This was an evidence that he was not puffed up with his advancement, as those are most apt to be that are raised from a mean estate. Providence had not yet found him business as a king, he left all to Samuel, and therefore, rather than be idle, he would, for the present, apply himself to his country business again. Though the sons of Belial would, perhaps, despise him the more for it, such as were virtuous and wise, and loved business themselves, would think never the worse of him. He had no revenues settled upon him for the support of his dignity, and he was desirous not to be burdensome to the people, for which reason, like Paul, he worked with his hands, for, if he neglect his domestic affairs, how must he maintain himself and his family? Solomon gives it as a reason why men should look well to their herds, because the crown doth not endure to every generation. Saul's did not, he must therefore provide something surer. His concern for his neighbors. When he perceived them in tears, he asked, "What ails the people that they weep? Let me know, that, if it be a grievance which can be redressed, I may help them, and that, if not, I may weep with them." Good magistrates are in pain if their subjects are in tears. His zeal for the safety and honor of Israel. When he heard of the insolence of the Ammonites, and the distress of a city, a mother in Israel, the Spirit of God came upon him, and put great thoughts into his mind, and his anger was kindled greatly. He was angry at the insolence of the Ammonites, angry at the mean and sneaking spirit of the men of Jabesh-Gilead, angry that they had not sent him notice sooner of the Ammonites' descent and the extremity they were likely to be reduced to. He was angry to see his neighbors weeping, when it was fitter for them to be preparing for war. It was a brave and generous fire that was now kindled in the breast of Saul, and such as became his high station. The authority and power he exerted upon this important occasion. He soon let Israel know that, though he had retired to his privacy, he had a care for the public, and knew how to command men into the field, as well as how to drive cattle out of the field. He sent a summons to all the coasts of Israel, to show the extent of his power beyond his own tribe, even to all the tribes, and ordered all the military men forthwith to appear in arms at a general rendezvous in Bezek. His modesty, in joining Samuel in commission with himself. He would not execute the office of a king without a due regard to that of a prophet. His mildness in the penalty threatened against those that should disobey his orders. He hews a yoke of oxen in pieces, and sends the pieces to the several cities of Israel, threatening, with respect to him who should decline the public service, not, "Thus shall it be done to him," but, "Thus shall it be done to his oxen." God had threatened it as a great judgment, "Thy ox shall be slain before thy eyes, and thou shalt not eat thereof." It was necessary that the command should be enforced with some penalty, but this was not nearly so severe as that which was affixed to a similar order by the whole congregation. Saul wished to show that his government was more gentle than that which they had been under. The effect of this summons was that the militia, or trained bands, of the nation, came out as one man, and the reason given is, because the fear of the Lord fell upon them. Saul did not affect to make them fear him, but they were influenced to observe his orders by the fear of God and a regard to him who had made Saul their king and them members one of another. Note, religion and the fear of God will make men good subjects, good soldiers, and good friends to the public interests of the country. Those that fear God will make conscience of their duty to all men, particularly to their rulers. His prudent proceedings in this great affair. He numbered those that came into him, that he might know his own strength, and how to distribute his forces in the best manner their numbers would allow. It is the honor of princes to know the number of their men, but it is the honor of the King of Kings that there is not any number of his armies. In this muster, it seems, Judah, though numbered by itself, made no great figure, for, as it was one tribe of 12, so it was but an 11th part of the whole number, though the rendezvous was at Bezek, in that tribe. They wanted the numbers, or the courage, or the zeal for which that tribe used to be famous, so low was it, just before the scepter was brought into it in David. His faith and confidence, and, grounded thereon, his courage and resolution, in this enterprise. It should seem that those very messengers who brought the tidings from Jabesh-Gilead Saul sent into the country to raise the militia, who would be sure to be faithful and careful in their own business, and them he now sends back to their distressed countrymen, with this assurance, in which, it is probable, Samuel encouraged him tomorrow, by such an hour, before the enemy can pretend that the 7 days have expired, you shall have deliverance. Be you ready to do your part, and we will not fail to do ours. Do you sally out upon the besiegers, while we surround them. Saul knew he had a just cause, a clear call, and God on his side, and therefore doubted not of success. This was good news to the besieged Gileadites, whose right eyes had wept themselves dry for their calamities, and now began to fail with looking for relief and to ache in expectation of the doom of the ensuing day, when they must look their last, the greater the exigence the more welcome the deliverance. When they heard it they were glad, relying on the assurances that were sent to them. And they sent into the enemy's camp to tell them that next day they would be ready to meet them, which the enemies understood as an intimation that they despaired of relief, and so were made the more secure by it. If they took not care, by sending out scouts, to rectify their own mistake, they must thank themselves if they were surprised. The besieged were under no obligation to give them notice of the help they were assured of. His industry and close application to this business. If he had been bred up to war from his youth, and had led regiments as often as he had followed droves, he could not have gone about an affair of this nature more dexterously nor more diligently. When the Spirit of the Lord comes upon men it will make them expert even without experience. A vast army, especially in comparison with the present usage, Saul had now at his foot, and a long march before him, nearly 60 miles, and over Jordan too. No cavalry in his army, but all infantry, which he divides into 3 battalions. With what incredible swiftness he flew to the enemy. In a day and a night he came to the place of action, where his own fate, and that of Israel, must be determined. He had passed his word, and would not break it, nay, he was better than his word, for he promised help next day. By that time the sun was hot, but brought it before day, in the morning watch. Whom God helps he helps right early. With what incredible bravery he flew upon the enemy. Betimes in the morning, when they lay dreaming of the triumphs they expected that day over the miserable inhabitants of Jabesh-Gilead, before they were aware he was in the midst of their host, and his men, being marched against them in 3 columns, surrounded them on every side, so that they could have neither heart nor time to make head against them. Lastly, to complete his honor, God crowned all these virtues with success. Jabesh-Gilead was rescued, and the Ammonites were totally routed. He had now the day before him to complete his victory in, and so complete a victory it was that those who remained, after a great slaughter, were scattered so that 2 of them were not left together to encourage or help one another. We may suppose that Saul was the more vigorous in this matter, because there was some alliance between the tribe of Benjamin and the city of Jabesh-Gilead. That city had declined joining with the rest of the Israelites to destroy Gibeah, which was then punished as their crime, but perhaps was now remembered as their kindness, when Saul of Gibeah came with so much readiness and resolution to relieve Jabesh-Gilead. Yet that was not all. 2/3 of the Benjamites that then remained were provided with wives from that city, so that most of the mothers of Benjamin were daughters of Jabesh-Gilead, for which city Saul, being a Benjamite, had therefore a particular kindness, and we find they returned his kindness. Because it was the Ammonites' invasion that induced the people to desire a king, so Samuel says, so that if he had not done his part, in this expedition, he would have disappointed their expectations, and forever forfeited their respect. Saul has now taken his leave of Samuel, much amazed, we may well suppose, at what has been done to him, almost ready to question whether he be awake or no, and whether it be not all a dream. Now here we are told what occurred by the way. Those signs which Samuel had given him came to pass very punctually, but that which gave him the greatest satisfaction of all was this: he found immediately that God had given him another heart. A new fire was kindled in his breast, such as he had never before been acquainted with. Seeking the asses is quite out of his mind, and he thinks of nothing but fighting the Philistines, redressing the grievances of Israel, making laws, administering justice, and providing for the public safety. These are the things that now fill his head. He finds himself raised to such a pitch of boldness and bravery as he never thought he should be conscious of. He has no longer the heart of a husbandman, which is low, and mean, and narrow, and concerned only about his corn and cattle, but the heart of a statesman, a general, a prince. Whom God calls to any service he will make fit for it. If he advance to another station, he will give another heart, to those who sincerely desire to serve him with their power. What occurred when he came near home? They came to the hill, that is, to Gibeah, or Geba, which signifies a hill, and so the Chaldee here takes it as a proper name. He met with the prophets as Samuel had told him, and the Spirit of God came upon him, strongly and suddenly, so the word signifies, but not so as to rest and abide upon him. It came on so as to go off quickly. However, for the present, it had a strange effect upon him, for he immediately joined with the prophets in their devotion, and that with as much decorum and as great a transport of affection as any of them, he prophesied among them. Now, his prophesying was publicly taken notice of. He was now among his acquaintance, who, when they saw him among the prophets, called one another to come and see a strange sight. This would prepare them to accept him as a king, though one of themselves, when they had seen how God had advanced him to the honor of a prophet. The 70 elders prophesied before they were made judges. They all wondered to see Saul among the prophets. What is this that has come to the son of Kish? Though this school of the prophets was near his father's house, yet he had never associated with them, nor shown them any respect, perhaps had sometimes spoken slightly of them, and now to see him prophesying among them was a surprise to them, as it was long after when his namesake, in the New Testament, preached that gospel which he had before persecuted. Where God gives another heart it will soon show itself. One of them, that was wiser than the rest, asked, "Who is their father, or instructor? Is not God? Are they not all taught of him? Do they not all owe their gifts to him? And is he limited? Cannot he make Saul a prophet, as well as any of them, if he please? Or, is not Samuel their father? Under God, he was so, and Saul had now lately been with him, which, by his servant, he might know. No marvel for him to prophesy who lay last night under Samuel's roof." It became a proverb, commonly used in Israel, when they would express their wonder at a bad man's either becoming good, or at least being found in good company. Is Saul among the prophets? Note, Saul among the prophets is a wonder to a proverb. Let not the worst be despaired of, yet let not an external show of devotion, and a sudden change for the present, be too much relied on, for Saul among the prophets was Saul still. His being anointed was kept private. When he had done prophesying, 1. It should seem he uttered all his words before the Lord, and recommended the affair to his favor, for he went straight to the high place, to give God thanks for his mercies to him and to pray for the continuance of those mercies. He industriously concealed from his relations what had passed. His uncle, who met with him either at the high place or as soon as he came home, examined him. Saul owned, for his servant knew it, that they had been with Samuel, and that he told them the asses were found, but said not a word of the kingdom. This was an instance of his humility. Many a one would have been so elated with this surprising elevation as to proclaim it upon the housetop. But Saul, though he might please himself with it in his own breast, did not pride himself in it among his neighbors. The heirs of the kingdom of glory are well enough pleased that the world knows them not. Of his prudence, had he been forward to proclaim it, he would have been envied, and he knew not what difficulty that might have created him. Samuel had communicated it to him as a secret, and he knows how to keep counsel. Thus it appears that he had another heart, a heart fit for government. Of his dependence upon God, he does not go about to make an interest for himself, but leaves it to God to carry on his own work by Samuel, and, for his own part, sits still, to see how the matter will fall. We have here the improvement of the glorious victory which Saul had obtained, not the improvement of it abroad, though we take it for granted that the men of Jabesh-Gilead, having so narrowly saved their right eyes, would with them now discern the opportunity they had of avenging themselves upon these cruel enemies and disabling them from ever straightening them in like manner again. Now shall they be avenged on the Ammonites for their right eyes condemned, as Samson on the Philistines for his 2 eyes put out. Judge 16:28. But the account here given is of the improvement of this victory at home. The people took this occasion to show their jealousy for the honor of Saul, and their resentment of the indignities done him. Samuel, it seems, was present, if not in the action. It was too far for him to march, yet to meet them when they returned victorious, and to him, as judge, the motion was made, for they knew Saul would not be judge in his own cause, that the sons of Belial that would not have him to reign over them should be brought forth and slain. Saul's good fortune, as foolish men commonly call it, went further with them to confirm his title than either his choice by lot or Samuel's anointing him. They had not courage thus to move for the prosecution of those that opposed him when he himself looked mean, but, now that his victory made him look great, nothing would serve but they must be put to death. Saul took this occasion to give further proofs of his clemency, for, without waiting for Samuel's answer, he himself quashed the motion, "There shall not a man be put to death this day, no, not those men, those bad men, that had abused him," and therein reflected on God himself. 1. Because it was a day of joy and triumph, today the Lord has wrought salvation in Israel, and, since God has been so good to us all, let us not be harsh one to another. Now that God has made the heart of Israel in general so glad, let not us make sad the hearts of any particular Israelites. Because he hoped they were by this day's work brought to a better temper, were now convinced that this man, under God, could save them, now honored him whom before they had despised, and, if they are but reclaimed, he is secured from receiving any disturbance by them, and therefore his point is gained. If an enemy be made a friend, that will be more to our advantage than to have him slain. And all good princes consider that their power is for edification, not for destruction. Samuel took this occasion to call the people together before the Lord in Gilgal, that they might publicly give God thanks for their late victory. There they rejoiced greatly, and, that God might have the praise of that which they had the comfort of, they sacrificed to him, as the giver of all their successes, sacrifices of peace offerings. That they might confirm Saul in the government, more solemnly than had been yet done, that he might not retire again to his obscurity. Samuel would have the kingdom renewed, he would renew his resignation, and the people should renew their approbation, and so in concurrence with, or rather in attendance upon, the divine nomination, they made Saul king, making it their own act and deed to submit to him. Saul's nomination to the throne is here made public, in a general assembly of the elders of Israel, the representatives of their respective tribes at Mizpeh. It is probable that this convention of the states was called as soon as conveniently it might, after Saul was anointed, for, if there must be a change in their government, the sooner the better, it might be of bad consequence to be long in the doing. The people having met in a solemn assembly, in which God was in a peculiar manner present, and therefore it is said they were called together unto the Lord, Samuel acts for God among them. He reproves them for casting off the government of a prophet, and desiring that of a captain. He shows them how happy they had been under the divine government, when God ruled them, he delivered them out of the hand of those that oppressed them, and what would they desire more? Could the mightiest man of valor do that for them which the Almighty God had done? He likewise shows them what an affront they had put upon God, who had himself saved them out of all their tribulations, by his own power, and by such as he had immediately called and qualified, in desiring a king to save them. He tells them in plain terms, "You have this day rejected your God, you have in effect done it," so he construes it, and he might justly, for your so doing, reject you. Those that can live better by sense than by faith, that stay themselves upon an arm of flesh rather than upon the Almighty arm, forsake a fountain of living waters for broken cisterns. And some make their obstinacy in this matter to be a presage of their rejecting Christ, in casting off whom they cast off God, that he should not reign over them. He puts them upon choosing their king by lot. He knew whom God had chosen, and had already anointed him, but he knew also the peevishness of that people, and that there were those among them who would not acquiesce in the choice if it depended upon his single testimony, and therefore, that every tribe and every family of the chosen tribe might please themselves with having a chance for it, he calls them to the lot. Benjamin is taken out of all the tribes, and out of that tribe Saul the son of Kish. By this method it would appear to the people, as it already appeared to Samuel, that Saul was appointed of God to be king, for the disposal of the lot is of the Lord. It would also prevent all disputes and exceptions, for the lot causeth contentions to cease, and parteth between the mighty. When the tribe of Benjamin was taken, they might easily foresee that they were setting up a family that would soon be put down again, for dying Jacob had, by the spirit of prophecy, entailed the dominion upon Judah. Judah is the tribe that must rule as a lion, Benjamin shall only raven as a wolf, Those therefore that knew the Scriptures could not be very fond of the doing of that which they foresaw must, ere long, be undone again. It is with much ado, and not without further inquiries of the Lord, that Saul is at length produced. When the lot fell upon him, every one expected he should answer to his name at the first call, but, instead of that, none of his friends could find him. He had hidden himself among the stuff, so little fond was he now of that power which yet, when he was in possession of, he could not without the utmost indignation think of parting with. He withdrew, in hopes that, upon his not appearing, they would proceed to another choice, or thus to express his modesty, for, by what had already passed, he knew he must be the man. We may suppose he was at this time really averse to take upon him the government, because he was conscious to himself of unfitness for so great a trust. He had not been bred up to books, or arms, or courts, and feared he should be guilty of some fatal blunder, because it would expose him to the envy of his neighbors that were ill affected towards him. Because he understood, by what Samuel had said, that the people sinned in asking a king, and it was in anger that God granted their request. Because the affairs of Israel were at this time in a bad posture, the Philistines were strong, the Ammonites threatening, and he must be bold indeed that will set sail in a storm. But the congregation, believing that choice well made which God himself made, would leave no way untried to find him out on whom the lot fell. They inquired of the Lord, either by the high priest, and his breastplate of judgment, or by Samuel, and his spirit of prophecy, and the Lord directed them where they should find him, hidden among the carriages, and thence they fetched him. Note, none will be losers at last by their humility and modesty. Honor, like the shadow, follows those that flee from it, but flees from those that pursue it. Samuel presents him to the people, and they accept him. He needed not to mount the bench, or scaffold, to be seen. When he stood upon even ground with the rest he was seen above them all, for he was taller than any of them by head and shoulders. Look you, said Samuel, what a king God has chosen for you, just such a one as you wished for. There is none like him among all the people, that has so much majesty in his countenance and such a graceful stateliness in his mien. He is in the crowd like a cedar among the shrubs. Let your own eyes be judges, is he not a brave and gallant man? The people hereupon signified their approbation of the choice, and their acceptance of him. They shouted and said, Let the king live, that is, let him long reign over us in health and prosperity. Subjects were wont to testify their affection and allegiance to their prince by their good wishes, and those turned, as our translation does this, into addresses to God. Prayer shall be made for him continually. Samuel had told them they would soon be weary of their king, but, in the mind they are now in, they will never be so. Let the king live. Samuel settles the original contract between them, and leaves it upon record. He had before told them the manner of the king, how he would abuse his power. Now he tells them the manner of the kingdom, or rather the law or judgment or constitution of it, what power the prince might challenge and the utmost of the property the subject might claim. He fixed the landmarks between them, that neither might encroach upon the other. Let them rightly understand one another at first, and let the agreement remain in black and white, which will tend to preserve a good understanding between them ever after. The learned Bishop Patrick thinks he now repeated and registered what he had told them of the arbitrary power their kings would assume, that it might hereafter be a witness against them that they had drawn the calamity upon themselves, for they were warned what it would come to, and yet they would have a king. The convention was dissolved when the solemnity was over. Samuel sent every man to his house. Here were no votes passed, nor, for aught that appears, so much as a motion made, for the raising of money to support the dignity of their new elected king. If therefore he afterwards thinks fit to take what they do not think fit to give, which yet it was necessary that he should have, they must thank themselves. They went every man to his house, pleased with the name of a king over them, and Saul also went home to Gibeah, to his father's house, not puffed up with the name of a kingdom under him. At Gibeah he had no palace, no throne, no court, yet thither he goes. If he must be a king, as one mindful of the rock out of which he was hewn, he will make his own city the royal city, nor will he be ashamed, as too many are when they are preferred, of his mean relations. Such a humble spirit as this puts a beauty and luster upon great advancements. The condition rising, and the mind not rising with it, behold how good and pleasant it is. But how did the people stand affected to their new king? The generality of them, it should seem, did not show themselves much concerned. They went every man to his own house. Their own domestic affairs lay nearer their hearts than any interests of the public. This was the general temper. There were some so faithful as to attend him, a band of men whose hearts God had touched. v. 26. Not the body of the people, but a small company, who because they were fond of their own choice of a king, or because they had so much more sense than their neighbors as to conclude that if he was a king he ought to be respected accordingly, went with him to Gibeah, as his lifeguard. They were those whose hearts God had touched, in this instance, to do their duty. Note, whatever good there is in us, or is done by us, at any time, it must be ascribed to the grace of God. If the heart bend at any time the right way, it is because he has touched it. One touch is enough, when it is divine. There were others so spiteful as to affront him, children of Belial, men that would endure no yoke, that would be pleased with nothing that either God or Samuel did. They despised him for the meanness of his tribe and family, the smallness of his estate, and the privacy of his education, and they said, "How shall this man save us?" Yet they did not propose any man more likely, nor, whomsoever they had, must their salvation come from the man, but from God. They would not join with their neighbors in testifying an affection to him and his government, by bringing him presents, or addressing him upon his accession to the crown. Perhaps those discontented spirits were most earnest for a king, and yet, now that they had one, they quarreled with him, because he was not altogether such a one as themselves. It was reason enough for them not to like him because others did. Thus differently are men affected to our exalted Redeemer. God hath set him king upon the holy hill of Zion. There is a remnant that submit to him, rejoice in him, bring him presents, and follow him wherever he goes, and they are those whose hearts God has touched, whom he has made willing in the day of his power. But there are others who despise him, who ask, "How shall this man save us?" They are offended in him, stumble at his external meanness, and they will be broken by it. How did Saul resent the bad conduct of those that were disaffected to his government? He held his peace. Margin, he was as though he had been deaf. He was so far from resenting it that he seemed not to take notice of it, which was an evidence of his humility and modesty, and the mercifulness of his disposition, and also that he was well satisfied with his title to the crown, for those are commonly most jealous of their honor, and most revengeful of affronts, that gain their power by improper means. Christ held his peace when he was affronted, for it was the day of his patience, but there is a day of recompense coming. In this chapter we have the first fruits of Saul's government, in the glorious rescue of Jabesh-Gilead out of the hands of the Ammonites. Let not Israel thence infer that therefore they did well to ask a king, God could and would have saved them without one, but let them admire God's goodness, that he did not reject them when they rejected him, and acknowledge his wisdom in the choice of the person whom, if he did not find fit, yet he made fit, for the great trust he called him to, and enabled, in some measure, to merit the crown by his public services, before it was fixed on his head by the public approbation. The great extremity to which the city of Jabesh-Gilead, on the other side of Jordan, was reduced by the Ammonites. Saul's great readiness to come to their relief, whereby he signalized himself. The good success of his attempt, by which God signalized him. Saul's tenderness, notwithstanding this, towards those that had opposed him. The public confirmation and recognition of his election to the government.